My name is Valen Karth, and I am writing this from a room that grows darker by the hour. The lights flicker because the human engineers who built our power grid stopped answering our calls 6 hours ago. I can hear shouting in the corridor. The Drakkar delegate is screaming at someone. The Sirathi ambassador has locked herself in her office and refuses to come out. And I, the proud Voxian chief liaison, am staring at a single message on my screen that has changed everything. The message is short, 26 words. I have read it 40 times in the last hour, and each time I feel my 3 hearts beat faster. It says that Earth has withdrawn from all diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council, effective immediately. All human ambassadors are being recalled. All embassies are closing. We are not to contact them. Ever. I should explain how we arrived at this moment. 3 days ago, I sat in the main council chamber and watched a vote that I now realize was the beginning of our destruction. The Drakkar delegation, with quiet support from my own Voxian government, pushed through a trade rule that would crush human expansion into the outer veil systems. The new tariffs were brutal. They would bankrupt thousands of human colonies within a single year. The Drakkar ambassador stood at the speaking platform and laughed as the vote passed. He actually laughed. The human ambassador, a tall woman named Elena Vance, sat very still throughout the entire process. She did not argue. She did not protest. When the vote ended, she stood up, gathered her papers, and walked out of the chamber. Her footsteps echoed in the silent room. I remember turning to my aide and smiling. I told him that humans were finally learning their place. I told him they had spent 40 years pretending to be our equals, and now they understood. I was wrong about everything. The next day, the Drakkar ambassador went on council broadcast and called humans an emotional, primitive species. He said their governments were ruled by feelings instead of logic. He said they did not deserve their seats at the diplomatic tables. The Sirathi delegation followed by refusing to share medical research with Earth, even though a serious illness was spreading through 3 human colonies. My own premier sent me orders to redirect human refugee ships away from neutral ports, to make their lives harder, to remind them who held the power in this galaxy. I followed those orders without question. I signed papers that closed safe harbors to families fleeing disasters. I approved policies designed to make humans suffer just enough to bring them back to the negotiating table on their knees. And the humans said nothing. That silence should have warned me, but I was too proud to see it. I drank fermented nectar in my chambers and toasted what I believed was a great victory for the older species. I told my friends that humans would be back within a month, begging for forgiveness. I was so certain. I had spent my entire career studying them. I knew their weaknesses. I knew they could not survive without us. Then this morning, the message arrived. I read it the first time and laughed. I read it the second time and frowned. By the third reading, my hands were shaking. I called the human embassy. The line was disconnected. I called the human consulate on Senderis Prime. The building was empty. I sent emergency messages to every human contact I had built over 20 years of diplomatic work. None of them answered. Not one. I went to the embassy myself. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The building stood quiet in the morning light. The human flag was gone from the front entrance. The doors were locked. Through the windows, I could see empty desks, removed pictures, clean floors. They had not just left. They had erased themselves from the building as if they had never been there at all. A small note was attached to the front door. One sentence: the building has been sold to a Turan property company. The sale was completed at 8 o'clock this morning. 15 minutes. The humans had been preparing for this for a long time. I returned to my chambers and tried to convince myself this was temporary. A diplomatic tantrum. An emotional reaction. Humans were emotional creatures after all. They would calm down. They would come back. But then the reports started coming in. Every human freighter in council space had changed course at exactly the same moment. Not gradually, all at once. They were heading home. The shipping conglomerate on Vex Station, which was owned by humans, had closed its doors. The medical clinic on Senderis that treated children of 40 species had posted a notice of permanent closure. Human doctors, human engineers, human teachers, human technicians, all of them were quietly packing up their lives and leaving. I called the council speaker and demanded an emergency session. He told me the same thing was happening on his world. His daughter, studying at a human university on Earth, had been politely escorted to a transport ship that morning. She was on her way home. Every human-run school across the galaxy had done the same thing. Thousands of students from hundreds of species were being sent back to their home worlds. The speaker's voice broke as he told me this. He said his daughter had loved that school. She was crying when she called him. I sat at my desk and tried to understand what was happening. This was not a tantrum. This was not an emotional outburst. This was organized. This had been prepared for months, maybe years. A knock came at my door. My aide entered, his skin pale with worry. He handed me a tablet. The Drakkar military, he said, has just lost contact with 22 of their warships. The ships have not been attacked. They have simply stopped working. Their reactors powered down on their own. The crews are safe, but stranded in deep space. The Drakkar military used human-built navigation computers in those ships. They had bought them cheaply 20 years ago because human technology was always reliable and inexpensive. They had never bothered to learn how the systems worked. Why would they? The systems just worked. They always worked. Until this morning. I asked my aide if there was any pattern to the failures. He nodded slowly, his voice dropping to a whisper. Every Drakkar warship that stopped working contained human-designed components. Every Sirathi research station that went dark relied on human specialists. Every Voxian factory that halted production used human-manufactured parts. He paused. The humans are not threatening us. They are not attacking us. They are simply leaving. And as they leave, they are taking with them everything we grew dependent on without noticing. I pulled up the trade reports for the last 50 years. My hands shook as I scrolled through them. 43% of our advanced medicines came from human laboratories. 58% of our agricultural yields depended on human-engineered seeds. 67% of our rare earth refining was done by human-owned companies. Our communication networks, our power grids, our food production systems, our medical infrastructure, all of it had human fingerprints on it. We had not noticed because humans never demanded credit. They smiled. They worked hard. They charged fair prices. They never threatened us. They never reminded us how much we needed them. And now they were gone. I called my premier on the secure line. He answered on the first ring, which told me he was already aware of the situation. His voice was shaking when he asked me what had happened. I told him the humans had left. He laughed nervously and said they would come back. I asked him if he was certain. He went silent for a long moment. Then he asked me a question that I will remember for the rest of my life. He asked me what we would do if they did not come back. I did not have an answer. I told him I would call him back and ended the conversation. I sat alone in my chambers and tried to think clearly. The humans had given us no warning. But had they really given us no warning? I started searching through my old files. I pulled up every diplomatic message from Earth in the last 5 years. There were thousands of them. I had filed most away as routine complaints, the kind of emotional outbursts I had come to expect from humans who did not understand how the older species operated. I started reading them. The first message was from 12 years ago. A formal complaint about council policies that the human ambassador said were creating a system where younger species could never advance. The language was polite. The arguments were careful. The warnings were clear. I had never read past the first paragraph. I had marked it low priority and moved on. The second message was from 10 years ago. It warned that humans were building independent supply chains because they no longer trusted the council to treat them fairly. I had laughed at this one when I first received it. I remember now, I had shown it to my colleagues, and we had joked about how dramatic humans were. The third message was from 8 years ago. It listed 17 specific incidents where council members had treated human delegates with disrespect. It asked in formal language for the council to address these issues. I had filed it without reading the list. The fourth message was from 6 years ago. It was shorter and colder. It said that humans were beginning to question whether membership in the council was worth the constant insults and unfair treatment. The fifth message was from 4 years ago. It said that if certain patterns continued, humans would be forced to consider their options. The sixth message was from 2 years ago. It said that humans were prepared to walk away. The seventh message was from 6 months ago. It said the decision had been made and was waiting only for the right moment. I stopped reading after the seventh message. My hands were shaking too badly to hold the tablet. They had warned us 47 times across 12 years. In writing, in person, in formal sessions, in private meetings. And we had ignored every single warning because we believed they needed us more than we needed them. We had been so wrong. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window. The council station spread out below me, vast and beautiful, lit by the soft glow of 1,000 worlds. I could see the human embassy from here. It was dark. The lights were off. There were no human ships at the docking ports. The corner of the station that had always belonged to Earth was empty for the first time in 40 years. I thought about Elena Vance walking out of the chamber 3 days ago. I thought about her quiet footsteps. I thought about the small smile she had given me as she passed my seat. I had not understood that smile then. I understood it now. It was the smile of someone who knew something I did not. It was the smile of someone who was already gone. The lights in my chamber flickered again. Outside in the hallway, I could hear more shouting. Someone was crying. I sat back down at my desk and opened a new document. I needed to write this down, all of it, every detail, because something terrible was about to happen. And someone needed to remember how it had started. It had started with a vote, 3 days ago. It had started with a Drakkar ambassador who laughed. It had started with a Voxian premier who thought himself wise. It had started with me smiling at a quiet human woman as she walked out of a room. It had started with the simple, fatal belief that silence meant weakness. I now know that the humans had been listening. They had been counting. They had been remembering. And while we mocked them and dismissed them and used them, they had been quietly building the door through which they would one day walk away. That door had closed this morning. And as I write these words, I can already feel the cold air rushing in to fill the empty space they left behind. The next 30 days would teach us what that empty space truly meant. The next 30 days would teach us that humans had not just been useful to us. They had been holding our entire civilization together with their patient, quiet work. And without them, everything would fall apart. The morning after the humans left, I woke to darkness. My apartment lights would not turn on. The water would not flow from the taps. The food preservation unit had gone warm overnight, and everything inside had spoiled. I stood in my kitchen in the dim light of dawn and realized that the human-built systems running my home had stopped working without their daily maintenance signals. I dressed quickly and went to the council station. The transport tubes were running but slow. Half the corridor lights were out. I passed 3 delegates in the hallway. All of them looked tired and frightened. The Sirathi ambassador, normally proud and elegant, was wearing the same clothes as the day before. Her hair was uncombed. She nodded at me without speaking. The emergency council session began at the 7th hour. I had never seen the chamber so full. Every delegate from every species was present. The seats reserved for human representatives sat empty in the front row, a constant reminder of what we had lost. The speaker tried to bring the meeting to order, but no one was listening. Delegates shouted at each other. The Drakkar ambassador demanded military action. The Turan delegate wept openly. Finally, the speaker pounded his ceremonial staff against the platform until the chamber went silent. He began by listing what we knew. Every human had left council space within 48 hours. Every human-owned business had closed or been transferred to other ownership. Every human-built system requiring ongoing technical support was failing. The Council's own translation network, maintained by a human company for 30 years, was breaking down. 3 minor languages had already become untranslatable. The Drakkar ambassador stood up before the speaker had finished. He demanded that the Council send warships to Earth immediately. He said humans had committed an act of economic warfare. He said we must teach them a lesson they would never forget. I watched him speak and felt something I had never felt before. Embarrassment. Deep, burning embarrassment. He was demanding war against a species that had not fired a single shot. They had simply gone home. And he was suggesting we attack them for it. The speaker asked the Drakkar ambassador if he had reviewed the military assessments. The ambassador said he had not. The speaker pulled up the report on the main screen. The numbers were brutal. 68% of our combined fleet used human-designed targeting systems. Those systems had stopped receiving updates this morning. They would slowly become inaccurate over the coming weeks. 43% of our warships used human-manufactured power couplings. Replacement parts no longer existed because the factories had closed. Every single one of our advanced medical ships had human-trained doctors who were now on transports heading home. The Drakkar ambassador sat down without saying another word. The Sirathi Grand Researcher stood up next. Her voice was thin and broken. She spoke about the medical situation. The cancer treatments she had been receiving for 3 years were manufactured on a human world. She had a 6-month supply remaining. After that, she would die. She was not the only one. Hundreds of thousands of citizens across the council depended on human medicines. Without resupply, many of them would not survive the year. The chamber fell into terrible silence as she sat down. I rose from my seat. I walked slowly to the speaking platform. My legs felt heavy. I had spent my entire career arguing that humans were a useful but minor species. Now I had to stand before the council and admit how wrong I had been. I began by reading the 7 warning messages I had found in my files. I read them slowly, each word echoing in the quiet chamber. I watched the faces of the delegates change as they listened. I saw recognition. I saw shame. I saw fear. When I finished reading, I told them I had found 47 similar warnings in my own files alone. I told them I had ignored every one. I asked the speaker how many warnings the council itself had received. He looked at his aide. The aide checked the records. The number came back. 231 formal warnings over 12 years. Each one logged, filed, and ignored. A delegate from the Brinari Federation stood up. She admitted that her own government had received 43 direct warnings from the human ambassador to her world. She had read each one personally and dismissed each as an emotional overreaction. She broke down crying as she spoke. One by one, delegates rose to confess. The Drakkar admitted to 160 warnings. The Sirathi admitted to 200. The smaller species admitted to dozens each. By the time everyone had spoken, the speaker's aide had counted over 4,000 formal warnings sent by humans to council members across the last 15 years. 4,000 warnings. 4,000 chances to change course. 4,000 opportunities to treat humans as equals instead of servants. We had wasted every single one. The speaker called a recess. I went to the observation deck and stood by the great window overlooking the station. I could see the empty docks where human ships used to gather. I could see the dark embassy. I could see the closed shops and quiet corridors. A small voice spoke beside me. I turned to find the Turan delegate, a young woman named Ressa, standing nearby. Turans were a small species, often dismissed. She looked up at me with wide gold eyes and asked if I knew why the humans had really left. I said I thought I did. The trade vote. The insults. The unfair treatment. She shook her head slowly. She told me a human friend had explained it to her last year. The trade vote was just the final straw. The humans had been ready to leave for a long time. They had been preparing for years. The thing that finally pushed them over the edge was not anger. It was not pride. It was sorrow. Ressa told me that humans had spent 40 years in the council hoping to change it from within. They had hoped that older species would eventually learn to treat younger ones as equals. They had hoped the system would grow more just over time. But year after year, they watched the same patterns repeat, the same insults, the same unfair votes, the same dismissive attitudes, the same casual cruelty. They had finally realized that the system would never change because the older species did not want it to change. The council was working exactly as it was designed to work, a tool for keeping power in the hands of those who already had power. No amount of patient reform would ever fix that. So the humans had stopped trying to change us. Instead, they had spent the last 12 years quietly building a future without us. Independent supply chains. Their own diplomatic networks with younger species we had ignored. Technology we did not understand and could not replicate. And when they were ready, they had simply walked away. Ressa's words struck me harder than any insult ever could. She told me one more thing before she walked away. She said the humans had not left to harm us. They had left because they had finally accepted that we could not be saved. The cruelty was too deep. The arrogance was too thick. They had given up on us, not in anger, but in tired sadness. I stood at the window for a long time after she left. I thought about my career. I thought about every meeting where humans had spoken and I had not listened. Every report I had filed dismissing their concerns. Every joke I had made at their expense. I had been part of this. I had helped build the system that had finally driven them away. And now I was watching the consequences of my work fall down around me. When the council session resumed, the chaos had returned. The Drakkar ambassador was demanding new measures. The Sirathi were demanding action. Several delegates proposed seizing human assets within council space to keep our systems running. I stood up again. This time, my voice was steadier. I told them their proposals were not just wrong, they were impossible. There were no human assets to seize. The humans had transferred everything to other parties before they left. Factories were now owned by Turan companies. Shipping lanes had been sold to Brinari corporations. Medical research belonged to smaller species that had quietly purchased it for low prices over the last 2 years. Humans had spent years carefully untangling themselves from our economy, leaving nothing behind for us to take. They had not just left. They had made sure we could not punish them for leaving. The Drakkar ambassador asked me what I proposed instead. I took a deep breath. I proposed that we send an envoy to Earth. Not to demand. Not to threaten. To apologize. To beg if necessary. To find out what we need to do to repair what we have broken. The chamber exploded in protest. The older species accused me of betraying my own people. The Drakkar ambassador called me a coward. My own premier sent me a private message telling me to stand down immediately. I refused. I told the council that pride had led us to this disaster. More pride would only make it worse. We had 2 choices. We could continue to pretend we were strong and watch our civilization slowly collapse over the next year. Or we could admit our mistakes and try to rebuild what we had destroyed. The vote was close, very close. 27 species voted in favor of sending an envoy. 26 voted against. The motion passed by a single vote. I was named the lead envoy. That night, I went back to my chambers and tried to pack. My apartment was still dark. The water was still off. I packed by the light of an emergency lamp. As I worked, I thought about what I would say to the humans when I reached Earth. I had no idea. Every speech I drafted in my head sounded hollow. Every apology felt insufficient. How do you apologize to a civilization for 40 years of casual cruelty? I did not know. But I had to try. The transport ship that would carry us to Earth was a hastily assembled vessel made of components from 12 different species. Half of it had once contained human-built parts, now removed and replaced with inferior alternatives. The ship rattled when it moved. The communications were unreliable. The navigation system was barely functional. We departed 3 days later, carrying 12 envoys representing the major species of the Council. We carried no weapons. We carried no demands. We carried only a desperate hope that the humans would still talk to us. The journey to Earth would take 11 days. 11 days to think about what we had done and what we would say. 11 days to wonder if we would even be allowed to land when we arrived. I spent those 11 days writing in my journal. I wrote about my career. I wrote about my mistakes. I wrote about Elena Vance walking out of the council chamber with her quiet smile. I wrote about Ressa standing beside me at the window. I wrote about the 4,000 warnings we had ignored. By the time we entered human space, I had filled 3 notebooks. None of the words felt right. None captured what I needed to say. But the time for writing was over. The borders of human space were marked by simple buoys broadcasting a polite message in every council language. You have entered sovereign Terran space without an invitation. Please turn back. We did not turn back. We continued forward slowly, weapons powered down, broadcasting continuous announcements of peaceful intent. We were not stopped. We were not contacted. We were simply ignored. For 6 days, we drifted through human space. We saw thriving worlds, busy shipyards, structures we did not recognize. The humans had been busy in their absence. They had been building things, new things, things we had no name for. Whatever future they were creating, it was a future they were creating without us. And as our small ship drifted past their vast achievements, I began to understand just how badly we had underestimated them. The Council had panicked when humans severed diplomacy. But standing on that ship, looking out at what they had built, I realized something far more frightening. The humans had not panicked at all. They had moved on. On the 7th day of our journey, we reached Sol. Earth itself glowed before us, a blue and white pearl turning slowly against the black. I stood on the bridge and stared at it through the viewing window. I had seen Earth in pictures 1,000 times, but seeing it with my own eyes felt different. It looked alive in a way no other world ever had. It looked like a place where things grew and changed and refused to stop moving. Around the planet, orbital structures stretched beyond comprehension. Some were larger than Council Station. Rings of light circled the equator. Vessels moved in patterns I did not understand. And there was a fleet, ships of a design I had never seen before, sleek and silent, unlike any human technology in our records. The humans had built all of this in plain sight. We had never noticed. We had been too busy looking down on them to look up at what they were doing. Our ship hailed Earth Control. No answer came for 2 hours. We waited in silence. The Drakkar envoy paced. The Sirathi ambassador prayed quietly. My aide stood beside me, watching the planet with wide, fearful eyes. Finally, a small shuttle detached from one of the orbital stations and approached us. Unarmed. Precise. The pilot was skilled. The shuttle docked without a bump, without a jolt. The airlock opened. A woman stepped through. She was tall, her hair gray at the edges. She wore a simple dark suit with no insignia. She carried a small tablet and nothing else. I recognized her immediately. Margaret Holloway, senior human diplomat, coordinator for the Sol Authority for 20 years. She did not greet us. She did not smile. She walked to the center of the bridge and stopped. Her eyes moved slowly over our group, studying each of us. When her gaze reached me, she paused. I felt something cold move through me. She knew exactly who I was. She had probably known for months. She spoke in a steady voice. "Why have you come?" I stepped forward. I had practiced my speech for 11 days. But in that moment, every prepared word fell out of my head. I spoke from somewhere deeper. I told her we had come to apologize. We had been wrong, deeply wrong, and we wanted to find a way to repair what we had broken. She listened without expression. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked me a question. "What specifically are you apologizing for?" I started to answer with general words: the trade vote, the insults, the unfair treatment. She held up her hand to stop me. General apologies are the language of people who do not really mean them. I want specific apologies for specific actions. Name each thing you did. So I did. I named the trade vote. I named the Drakkar ambassador's speech mocking human emotions. I named the Sirathi refusal to share medical research during the colony plague. I named my own approval of the order to redirect refugee ships. I named 20 other incidents from my own career. The Drakkar envoy named his actions next, his voice trembling. The Sirathi ambassador named hers. One by one, every envoy confessed what they had done. It took 3 hours. By the end, several of us were weeping. Margaret Holloway had not moved. She had simply listened. When we finished, she nodded slowly. This is a beginning. Not a solution. But a beginning. The first step toward repair is honest acknowledgement of harm. You have taken that step. She then explained the situation. Humans had not left out of anger, though anger had been part of it. They had left out of necessity. The Council, as structured, would never treat younger species as equals. Humans had spent decades trying to change it from inside. They had finally accepted that change was impossible. So they had built something better. 43 young species, all ignored or mistreated by the Council, had been quietly working with humans for 15 years. They had formed their own trade agreements, their own technologies, their own diplomatic frameworks based on equal voice and shared decision-making. It had no name yet, no single capital, no ruling body. It was already larger than the Council. We had not noticed because all its members were species we had dismissed. She told us that humans had no interest in destroying the Council. We could continue if we wished. But humans would not return. Their place was now in the new network. What they would offer us was a choice. We could cling to our pride and power for as long as we were able. Or we could begin the long, painful process of dismantling our old structures and building something new. Something based on equal voice. Respect for all species regardless of age or size. If we chose the second path, humans would consider eventually opening limited relations. Not a return to membership. Just the beginning of a conversation. The Drakkar envoy started to protest. Margaret Holloway turned to him. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. For 10,000 years, the Council has ruled by treating younger species as inferior. You have used your power to extract, to dominate, to dismiss. Humans have been patient students of history. We know what you did to the Brinari before they joined. We know what you did to the Turans. We know what you did to the Sirathi themselves before they were powerful enough to resist. The Council has not earned the respect you are demanding. It has earned the response you are now receiving. The Drakkar envoy sat down heavily. He did not speak again. Margaret Holloway turned back to the rest of us. She said humanity was not special. They were not stronger or smarter than other species. The only thing that made them different was that they remembered what it felt like to be small and dismissed. And they refused to forget, even as they grew in power. Most species forget. They join as small voices and grow into large ones. Then they treat new small voices the way they were once treated. The cycle continues. Humans broke the cycle, not by being better, just by remembering longer. She said this was the simplest gift she could give us. The knowledge that what humans had done was not impossible for us to do as well. We could remember. We could choose differently. We could break our own cycle. But we would have to do it ourselves. Humans would not save us. They would not lead us. They had their own civilization to build. We would have to find our own path. She turned to leave. I called after her. Is there any single thing we can do right now, in this moment, that would prove our intentions? She stopped, turned back, looked at me with eyes that contained no anger, only deep tiredness. Yes. Listen to your own small voices. The species you have ignored. The delegates you have dismissed. The Turans. The Brinari. They have been telling you the truth for centuries. You have not been hearing them. If you want to change, start by listening to them, not as a strategy, not as a tactic. As an honest practice of attention. That will be the test. If you can hear them, you can hear yourselves. If you cannot, you will never change. And humans will have no reason to ever speak with you again. Then she walked back to her shuttle. The airlock closed. The shuttle detached. We were left alone, drifting in human space, surrounded by structures we did not understand, carrying a truth we had refused to see for 10,000 years. As we turned the ship toward home, I thought about her final words. I thought about the small voices we had ignored. I thought about Ressa, standing beside me at the window of the Council station, telling me things I had not been ready to hear. I had 11 days back to the Council. 11 days to think about what I would say when I arrived. 11 days to decide what kind of envoy I would be, and what kind of person. 11 days to begin learning, for the first time in my life, how to actually listen. The journey home was different from the journey out. On the way to Earth, we had been frightened but united by a single purpose, to apologize and seek forgiveness. On the way back, we carried something heavier, the truth that there would be no quick forgiveness, no return to how things had been, no simple solution. I spent the first 3 days writing down everything Margaret Holloway had said. I wrote down every small voice I had ignored. I made a list: Turan delegates dismissed, Brinari ambassadors interrupted, younger species whose concerns I had filed away without reading. The list filled 12 pages. On the 4th day, I found Ressa. She was reading in the ship's small library. I sat down across from her and told her I wanted to listen, truly listen, to what her people had endured. She spoke for 6 hours. I wrote down everything. By the end, something inside me felt different. Like I had been carrying a heavy stone for many years and had only just realized it was there. When we reached council space, the station was visibly struggling. More lights were out. More systems had failed. The corridors were cold. People walked the hallways looking exhausted and frightened. The speaker called an emergency session immediately. I walked to the speaking platform with no notes. I described what we had seen, the orbital structures, the new ships, the bustling activity of human civilization. I told them honestly that humans were thriving without us. I read the warnings Margaret Holloway had given us. I explained the choice: continue as we were and collapse, or begin the long work of building something new. Then I did something I had never done before. I invited Ressa to speak. She walked to the platform with steady steps. Her gold eyes moved across the chamber, the same chamber where her people had been dismissed for 200 years. She described the Turan experience, the reduced voting weight, the crushed economy, the educational programs promised and never delivered, the medical assistance requested 70 times and denied. Her daughter refused entry to the diplomatic academy 3 times despite top scores. She spoke for an hour. The chamber was silent. No one interrupted. When she finished, the Brinari delegate stood and spoke. Then the Owani. Then the Korean. One by one, the small voices that had been ignored for centuries finally spoke, and for the first time, the council listened. The vote took 2 hours. The reforms passed, not by a single vote, but by a clear majority. 41 species voted yes. 12 voted no. The younger species voted unanimously in favor. The council, as we had known it, ended that day. 2 years passed. The reforms moved slowly, but they moved. Voting weight was abolished. Every species had the same vote. Decisions required broad agreement, not narrow majorities. Trade rules were rewritten to favor developing economies. It was difficult. The older species resisted. There were resignations and bitter divisions. But things moved. I traveled constantly, 43 worlds in 2 years. I sat in small meeting halls and listened. I asked questions. I tried very hard not to interrupt. It was harder than I expected. Some days I did better than others. Ressa became my closest friend. She told me which species to visit, which leaders to meet. She corrected me gently when I fell into old habits. On the 2nd anniversary of the human withdrawal, a message arrived through the Turan Neutral Diplomatic Service, the only channel that now connected us with Earth. A small human delegation would attend a meeting on Turan neutral territory. Not a return to formal relations. A single conversation. A measure of how things had progressed. We met in a simple hall on a quiet hillside surrounded by gardens. Margaret Holloway was older now, her hair fully gray, but she walked with the same calm steadiness. She asked us to tell her what had changed. I asked Ressa to speak first. She described the new voting system, the trade rules, the educational programs finally being delivered, the medical assistance finally arriving, the diplomatic respect finally being shown. She talked for an hour. Margaret Holloway listened without interrupting. When the last speaker finished, Holloway turned to her human companions. They spoke quietly. Then she turned back to us. She said humans had been watching closely for 2 years. They had seen the resignations, the resistance, the slow, painful work of changing minds. They had been impressed. They had not expected us to do as well as we had done. She said the choice to listen had made the difference. The choice to truly hear small voices had been the foundation of everything else we built. She said this was the simplest and most difficult thing any civilization could do. She thanked us for doing it. I felt tears fill my eyes. I had not expected gratitude. I had not expected praise. To be told that we had given humans reason for hope was more than I had imagined possible. The meeting ended. We exchanged small gifts, books, artworks. Plans were made to meet again in 2 more years. The human delegation departed. I stood with Ressa on the hillside, watching their shuttle disappear into the sky. She asked me how I felt. I thought about it for a long moment. Relief. Pride. Above all, the strange peace that comes when a long burden begins to lift. Grateful, I said. She nodded. Gratitude is a good place to begin the next chapter. The galaxy is different now. Smaller in some ways. The vast council I once served is gone forever. But the fragments that remain, and the new structures we have built among ourselves, are healthier than what came before. Voices that were never heard are now being listened to. Species that were forgotten are now being seen. The day the humans severed all diplomacy was the worst day of my life. It was also, though I could not have known it at that moment, the day my life truly began. I am grateful for it. I will be grateful for it until the day I die. The work continues. Every day. In every meeting. In every small choice to truly hear what someone is saying. I am older now. My career is mostly behind me. But I still travel when I can. I still listen when invited. I still write down what I learn. And every 2 years, when our delegation meets with the humans on the Turan neutral world, I bring new stories to share. New voices that have been heard. New harms that have been repaired. New small steps toward a better way of being. Margaret Holloway has retired now. But other humans come in her place. They listen as she did. They ask careful questions. They return home to their own civilization, which continues to grow in ways we still do not fully understand. We do not need to understand them anymore. We are too busy understanding ourselves. That is enough. That is, in fact, more than I once believed possible. The garden around the meeting hall is full of flowers in bloom. The wind is soft and warm. The sky above us is clear and blue. Ressa is walking beside me down the hillside, talking about the next reforms, the next visits, the next small steps. I am listening. I am finally, truly listening.